Every subculture has its own language and sayings, and our churches are not immune to this. However, when you've spent as much time in churches as I have, delivering announcements, reviewing websites, visiting services, you begin to notice certain sayings that are awkward, or could at the very least use improvement. And so in this video, I want to share with you a few church sayings I don't care for, along with better options you can swap in instead.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show where in 10 minutes or less, you're going to get a dose of tips and tactics to help your church share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by the boss man, Brady Shearer.
Alex, if I asked you the question, what makes Disney the premier amusement park destination compared to all others? The answer that most of us would say is that they just pay so much attention to all the little details.
Yeah, it's all perfect.
One of the things I found when I went to Disney for the first time was that Walt Disney, the legend goes, would sit in his park and watch as people would walk by with garbage in their hands. And he would count how many steps they would take looking for a garbage disposal area before giving up and saying, I'll just throw it. And one of the hallmarks of Disney is how little garbage and litter that there is. And one of the reasons is because they've strategically placed garbage bins, I think it was 25 steps at all times, so that a person will not try to find a garbage can, realize they can't find one and give up. Like, you know that feeling when you're at the mall and you're like, I have to go pee so bad, and there's only one bathroom, and it's literally on the 8th floor, a kilometer away.
Like, fine, I'll just go here.
Yeah, and you're just walking, it's just, I give up.
Yeah.
Exactly. You understand. Similarly, the types of sayings that we want to discuss and explore in this episode of Pro Church Tools, you might be thinking, if you're listening or watching, Brady, do we really need to pay this much attention to our wording and to our vernacular and to our vocabulary?
I like my Christianese. I'm fluent in it.
And the answer is, it's probably not that big of a deal if you ignore everything that I say in this video. Sometimes we have videos and I'm like, please, church, listen. This one is like, if you want to ignore, hey, I get it. I totally understand. But I think that when you do pay special attention to every single thing that you're doing, it raises the overall level of excellence and it includes more people. Overall, these types of things don't seem like they move the needle that much on their own, but collectively as the whole, they can make a difference.
Well, Brady, you and I kind of lean towards tendencies of perfectionism. And
not us.
If you're speaking, Enneagram language, where you'd label us the reformers. And so you and I can kind of see things in this way, be like, oh yeah, we can just make this little fix here, this little, similar to Walt Disney maybe. And for others, that's just not how their brains are wired. They just can't see things the way that, the way we're wired, the way people like us see things. But what we have noticed is when you make these subtle changes, and in this episode, it's going to be exclusively about language and Christianese and how we're kind of framing things with our words, it actually helps contribute to culture change as a whole, which we know a lot of our churches are currently going through that. How can we change the culture from this to that? Well, this is a good step.
Item number 1, how you reference people that are new to your church. I read a ton of announcements, literally tens of thousands of announcements, so I have a pretty good gauge on how churches tend to label these individuals and families. A lot of churches will say, hey, if you're a visitor. A lot of churches will say, hey, if you're a guest. A lot of churches will say, hey, if it's your first time, if you're a first-time visitor. If you're a first-time guest visitor, okay, that one doesn't happen. But these are the 3 that I hear the most, and I would recommend that you don't use first-time. I would recommend you don't use guest. I would recommend you don't use visitor. In fact, whenever I am addressing those that are new to our church, I simply use that specific word, new. So I'll be standing on stage and I'll be like, hey, if you're new to Central, I'll say, hey, are you new here? And I always use that language for a very specific reason. I think that of the 3 options that I mentioned earlier, the ones that I suggest you do not use, I think each comes with a fatal flaw. If you say if you're a first-time visitor, if you say if it's your first time with us, that assumes that when people are making their first visit to your church, that all of the necessary first-timer actions happen on that encounter.
Exactly.
But it doesn't. A lot of the times when people come back a second time, when they come back a third time, that's when they're actually willing to fill out the Connect card. That's when they head to the big blue wall in the lobby. And so if you're always saying, hey, if you're a first-timer with us, make sure to fill out that Connect card, and someone's sitting there as a second timer or a third timer, you're automatically excluding them, even though they are perhaps just as likely to take the action you are asking the first timer to take.
They're still new, right?
Exactly. New is a catch-all. It allows the person sitting in the pew or the seat to identify, oh yeah, I am new to this church.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you could be there for 3 months and still consider yourself as new.
Yeah, it kind of puts the definition of what new means into...
Give them the control. That's always what you want to do.
Right? Like, I've been here for a month, I'm new here. Maybe somebody who's been there, like you just said, 3 months, 6 months, still identifies as new here. That's fine. Let them classify themselves. But you're right, use that single word to be a catch-all for all new people.
So that's the problem with saying if you're first time with us, if it's your second time with us. The problem with saying if you're a visitor or are you a guest with us? Especially churches love to say this around Easter. They love to say this around Christmas.
Yeah.
But and it makes a little more sense during those seasonal times. But if this is happening on a week in, week out time, what you're doing is in those statements, you're assuming those people are not going to come back.
Right.
If you're a guest, that means that you're not part of the church and you don't intend to come back. If you're a visitor is inherent someone that will not be there normally.
Right.
If you are a visitor at someone's house, that means you don't live there.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, are you a visitor with us? You're just implying that they don't belong to this church.
Yeah.
And again, are we splitting hairs there? Yes. Will I always split every hair I can find? Yes. That is what I do. And that's why a lot of the times I'm successful at the things that I try to do is because I can find things on the margins that most people miss. And you're right. A lot of the times, maybe they're innocuous. Maybe they don't matter. But again, if you're focusing on all these little things, a lot of the times they can add up to something bigger. And it's really easy. If you're listening or watching this episode, you can make these changes so easy. Stop saying visitor, guest, first time, just say, are you new? Are you new to Central? Are you new to Life Abundant? Are you new to the second holy church of this city? Whatever your church's name is.
Right.
It's real easy.
Yeah.
Second thing, this one drives me crazy.
So hold on, the first one didn't drive you crazy? It's
The
now...
first one I can understand. This one just, okay.
Yeah.
It's when
This one's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
The first one's harmless. This one, well...
so much extra work. So when you create an ambiguous name for a ministry, thus creating the need to define the name of the ministry every single time you say it.
Right.
So I read announcements for churches every single week, and this happens every single week. Church will be like, hey, we'd love to see you at Momentify this week. Momentify is our student ministry for grades 7 to 9.
What's Momentify?
And they do this for every single ministry. They all have their exact, completely different, random, ambiguous name that does not define what it is whatsoever. And so every time they mention it, they then require another sentence or two to define what they're mentioning. And the whole point of giving something a name is to give it a brand so the brand is recognizable.
Yeah.
But this undercuts the entire strategy of naming something.
It's counterintuitive.
It's like if every time you said, hey, can you go get the lawnmower? You know, the thing that you turn on to cut the grass?
The thing that you mow the lawn with?
It's like, well, no, just call it what it is.
Yeah.
And this is something where I think churches can take a page out of brands' books like Coke or Apple or McDonald's, because we have Coke and Coke Zero and Diet Coke, and we have McDonald's, and we have the McNuggets, and we have the McChicken,
of course,
and we have the McInsert, whatever you want here, and then we have Apple, and we have the iPod, and we have the iMac, and we have the MacBook, and we have the MacBook Pro, and we and the iPhone, and all of these things are creating a brand. This is the distinction between a branded house and a house of brands.
Of course.
If you're a house of brands and you're Momentify and your Toil, which stands for Time of Your Life, which is actually the name of my senior adult ministries church when I went to as a kid, because, hey, it's the time of your life. Imagine creating an acronym. Not only do you have to define the acronym, but then you have to define what the acronym means.
It's no good.
This is monstrosity, Alex. I can't take it anymore. Just say what things are. If you're engaged church, you got engaged students. You got engaged kids. You've got engaged worship. Say it what it is. Be a branded house, not a house of brands. Two just little bonus ones that we want to talk about. If you're the type of church that says, well, all first-time visitors stand, we promise not to embarrass you, here's what you need to know. Every person that stands is being embarrassed. It's not really possible. I think it's very important to acknowledge first-time guests, those that I would say are new. Do not ask them to identify themselves. It's your job to acknowledge them. It's not their job to identify themselves to you.
Right.
That's not how it works. So at our church, we always acknowledge those that are new. And I say, hey, if you're new, it's so great to have you. I lay out our mission statement. I say everything at Central, we're about two things. We want to introduce people to faith, and we want you to grow deep in that faith to become all that God created you to be. And we truly believe that no matter where you are in your faith journey, where you are in that faith spectrum, Alex, there's a place for you to belong here at Central. That's why everything we do is about inviting people into a life that matters.
You've said that a few times.
I have. And that's actually kind of a new thing that we've been doing.
Yeah.
That way we acknowledge those that are new, they don't have to identify themselves. Also, if you're the type of pastor or preacher that says, hey, turn to your neighbor and tell them
worship leader.
they're looking good. Oh, worship leader. Yeah. You know what? They always get off scot-free. Worship leaders are calling you out. Hey, turn to your neighbor and say, you're better looking than my spouse. That's what ends up happening. You're standing next to a girl, and then the pastor says, turn to the person next to you and say, you're looking good today. And like, you're not my wife.
Can we just close our eyes and pray? Just grab the hand of the person next to you. And if you're single and you're interested in the person next to you, just give their hand a little squeeze.
What is that?
Stop it.
Anyway, we would love to hear from you. What is your favorite saying that you wish churches would not say? But here's the prerequisite. You've got to give an alternative.
Okay.
You got to offer an alternative. Worship pastors, your alternative for, hey, turn to the person next to you. Tell them they're looking good. Never say that. That's the alternative. Just don't say it.
Don't.
You don't. I know you're trying to like create atmosphere in the room.
Yeah.
You can do it with just good music. You don't need to do it by getting people to like hype. You're like the annoying people at the Toronto Raptors games that are like, stand to your feet. It's like, no, we'll stand when they're good.
Right.
Okay?
When they deserve it.
That'll do it for this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time. Hey, if you made it to the end of the video, you're amazing.
Yes.
And you've got this far, might as well subscribe.
And you might as well go ahead and like.
Seriously, if you watched to the end, we really appreciate you. Love you so much. Thanks again.